Wow, I did not expect so many little differences and changes that are making the XPS so incredible. Hey guys, it's Max. We just got in the brand new Dell XPS 13 9310, and today we're going to be comparing against Apple's latest and greatest 2020 13-inch MacBook Pro. The specs between these two are basically identical other than one key difference. Now I'm going to have links to both these down in the video description below. There's a fantastic price right now on the MacBook Pro. Let's go ahead and get this open. Dell has upgraded their packaging, but weirdly, they can't seem to glue this straight to make it look nice. And let's pull this off. We got this nice little briefcase style opening up. There we go. And today we're not only going to be comparing the specs, we're also going to take a deep dive into the keyboards, the trackpads, the displays, the brightness and reflectivity, the fan noise, the thermal performance. We're going to look at graphics, and I'm particularly excited because this new XPS is one of the first laptops with Intel's 11th generation processors with the Intel Xe graphics. Let's start out with the exterior differences, and even though the XPS has a slightly larger display, it's a 13.4 inch compared to 13.3, you guys can see that the MacBook Pro is longer and deeper as far as the size, so the Dell is nice and compact. Now, as far as thickness, they are very close. If we're measuring by the fronts, they are identical, but if we measure the backs where the hinges are, the XPS is slightly thicker, but its feet do stick out a little bit more. And as far as build quality and finishes, both are excellent. Dell has really stepped it up in the last year and a half. It's made out of a lot more aluminum, pretty much all aluminum. The hinge is aluminum now. The build quality is nice. And then if we take a look at the bottoms, both are very clean. And I like that Dell, just like Apple, now curves the side of the laptop. That means that these vents and ports right here aren't blocked by a blanket anymore like they used to, but they still have this bottom vent that can get blocked if it's on your lap. And now let's talk about ports. Both these laptops have ports on either side. The MacBook Pro, at least this higher spec model, has 4 Thunderbolt 3 ports, whereas the XPS has 1 port on each side. We also have headphone jacks on both, and the XPS offers us a micro SD card slot, which is really nice for those photographers out there, people that shoot drones, or just want a little bit extra storage. Now, there is one difference, that the ports on the XPS 13, this brand new one, are now Thunderbolt 4 ports, and that's paired with that 11th gen processor. And the maximum bandwidth is the same. There's just a lot less limitations on Thunderbolt 4. If you want to know more on all the details about how these compare, we'll have a link in the video description. Now let's go ahead and open these up. The MacBook Pro can open with one hand, which is nice. The Dell, unfortunately, doesn't have that same cutout, which is one thing that we wish they would update, and it's going to be a no-go. All right, so we're going to use two-handed method. There we go. Let's go ahead and get these turned on. And both of these do have Touch ID or fingerprint sensors in the power button, which is nice. And now as this is turning on, let's talk about the layouts. Now, right away, you can see the Dell XPS is quite a bit smaller than the 13-inch MacBook Pro. Now, we do have this nice soft touch carbon finish. I really like it. It doesn't get as cold as the MacBook Pros. It's nice and soft, but there are a couple downsides. One, it doesn't feel as premium as the full aluminum design, and two, it does pick up fingerprints really easily. A standout feature of the MacBook is the touch bar. Some people like it, some people don't like it. I just use it for the standard things we use the shortcut keys for. Rarely do I really need it. And a standout with the XPS is facial recognition with Windows Hello. Now, I absolutely love this. And let's tilt this right here. It's gonna recognize my face, and it's kind of like Face ID on an iPhone or an iPad. It works really great. You open up your laptop and bam, it logs you in almost instantly. Now, a lot of you guys always point out that you can use your Apple Watch to unlock your Mac, and yes, that does work, but I hope Apple adds in Face ID to their Macs in the future. And now let's compare the keyboards, and I have to say that Dell has been doing a great job, and I can't type and talk at the same time, but these keys feel excellent. I don't want to say that they feel better than Apple's Magic keyboard that just got updated as well, but maybe they might. These remind me of the Hush keys that Google has been putting out. You get a nice tactile feedback, but they also have a little bit of softness to them, not in a bad way, and they're quiet, whereas Apple's, they're a little bit louder, they give you a little bit more feedback, but I don't know, they're both excellent. Nobody's gonna have any issues with them. And I had my 2-in-1, the previous XPS, and this keyboard's good, but listen how much louder that is. And the same thing goes for the trackpad. You guys hear that clickiness? And both of these we gave really good reviews to. You hear the new XPS? Much quieter, and it feels great. Now, the trackpad design is a diving board design, meaning it's harder at the top instead of at the bottom, but it almost feels like it's not. It only gets really tough at the very top, but down just a little bit, it feels excellent. So they've definitely made this nicer. And then the MacBooks, well, it's a lot larger and it has that magnetic force touch design. It definitely is a step above, but once again, nobody's gonna complain about the XPS. And now let's do our webcam, microphone, and speaker comparison. We're gonna start out with the speakers. Go ahead and put on your best pair of headphones and let's take a listen. Let me know what you thought down in the comment section below. Of course, we're recording through a microphone, it's going through YouTube, so I'll give you guys my opinions. The MacBook Pro sounds a lot better. It has actual deep bass that you can hear instead of kind of a little bit of popping that's kind of more in the mids. The whole sound is richer, it's cleaner. Now the XPS is louder and the high frequencies, the tweeters are very sharp and very loud, but the sound quality isn't there. I'm still glad that it gets that loud. A lot of previous Dell XPSs a couple years ago were very quiet, so they definitely stepped up in that department. Now let's compare the webcams and the microphones. This is the microphone and webcam quality from the 2020 13-inch MacBook Pro. And this is the webcam and microphone quality from the 2020 Dell XPS 13. Let me know which one looks better and which one sounds better down in the comment section below. And now let's go ahead and compare the displays. Now, first thing that really comes up is the size of the bezels. The MacBook Pro's bezels, they're not huge, but when you put it against the 13-inch XPS, they do look pretty massive. I love that Dell is maximizing this chassis. They even got rid of the Dell logo down here so that you can have a larger screen that's also 16:10, just like the MacBook Pro. I love that. And as far as the sharpness or detail, both look excellent, but the Dell definitely has the MacBook B out. It has 9.2 million pixels, so we're actually slightly higher than 4K on this computer. Instead of right in between 1080p and 4K with the MacBook, we have 4 million pixels, so more than double the pixels on the XPS. Now with the Dell, you have multiple options for the displays. You can get a 1080p display. Ours is that 4K or more than 4K, and it's also a touchscreen, which you cannot get on the MacBook Pro. And with the MacBook, all the displays are identical. Now, as far as brightness, I went ahead and maxed out both of these, and they look very similar, at least from the standard usage angle. They're both at 500 nits, which is awesome. I'm glad Dell stepped up their displays. Really nice to look at in brighter environments. Now, off axis, Vadim's camera angle, he's saying that the Dell actually looks better than the MacBook Pro. Now there's two ways that the MacBook display actually beats out the XPS, but before that I do want to mention that I could definitely tell that the 4K display is sharper, especially with text. It's not a massive difference, but it's there, and with that you actually do lose battery life, and we're going to talk about battery life in just a bit. The first way the MacBook Pro's display is better is color accuracy. Now I have to say this is very interesting. If you guys see right here on both of these, we're seeing that logo inside of the box. Now in the previous XPS you couldn't, because they would not display P3 wide colors. It'd just be one, red color here. I just double checked, and yes, Dell did update this display. That is wonderful news. Now the MacBook Pro is still better with color accuracy, and it does almost 100% P3 compared to 90%, but that's still an excellent improvement. The second way is display reflectivity. Now the MacBook Pro has deeper blacks, it is less reflective, but the difference is actually pretty small, and I'm really surprised. And I just compared it to this 2-in-1, which has the same exact over 4K panel, 500 nits. It's a lot more reflective than the new XPS 13. So Dell has improved their coatings, and now it's much closer to the MacBook Pro, to a point where I would say it probably doesn't matter. Now yes, the blacks are a little bit more gray, but with that 500 nits, it's gonna do a great job outdoors in the sun. And now finally, let's get into performance. We're gonna start out with the SSDs. I have AJA open here because it's cross-platform. Let's go ahead and hit start. and both of these have 512 gigabyte NVMe SSDs, and it looks like the Dell is faster. We're looking at 2536 for write, so about 200 faster, and as far as read, it's about 200 to 300 megabyte per second faster as well. So not only is the XPS faster, but you can actually upgrade the SSD yourself. So later down the line, you want to throw a 1 terabyte or a 2 terabyte in, you could do so for not very much money, and with a matter of maybe 5-10 minutes, you'll be upgrading, which you can't do with the MacBook Pro. Now let's compare the processor performance using Geekbench 5. Both of these have i5 quad-core processors, but we're comparing 10th gen to the brand new 11th gen. Both these have low-power DDR4, but the XPS runs faster at about 4200 instead of about 3700. So we'll see how that plays into this test. Let's go ahead and hit run. And as this is running, let me tell you that both of these are equipped with 16 gigabytes of RAM, so no difference there. But there is a difference in base frequency. This one's at 2 gigahertz compared to 2.4, so it looks like 11th gen really kind of kicked up that base clock. And wow, that is an impressive result for the XPS. I don't think I've ever seen a single core score this high. And on the MacBook side, we're looking at, instead of 1401, which is amazing, 1098. Now this is a little bit lower than we typically get. We're typically at about 100 or so higher than that, about 1200. So this score right here for single core, that's a 28% difference. That's massive. And typically, we're on Big Sur right now. It typically be roughly 20% difference, which is still huge. Now, as far as the multi-core, it's still a big difference. We have 5350 compared to 4261, which is already a great score. And that's also actually slightly higher than 20% difference in performance. So it looks like the new chips in here with that faster RAM, it's making a pretty significant difference. And this XPS is going to be a screamer. I also want to mention that this actually ran quieter towards the end of the test, where it's multi-threaded, than the MacBook Pro. But we're going to take a look at fans and thermals here in just a second. And next, let's compare the graphics. Now, our MacBook Pro has the G7 graphics, the best available for the 10th generation, but the new XPS 11th gen has Intel Iris Xe graphics. I don't know if that stands for extreme or something else, but let's run this test using OpenCL. Wow, that finished so much faster. I don't know the score yet because it's being blocked by this. Let's wait for the MacBook to catch up. All right, we have 8408 for the OpenCL, which is our typical score, and 14,881. So that is about 80% faster graphics with this new Intel 11th Gen Xe. That's very impressive. Now, I do have to mention that with the MacBook Pro using macOS, most applications are now using Metal, so I did run the Metal test as well. We got 9708, so we got a higher score there, and even with that, the XPS is still roughly 50% faster in terms of graphics performance. Now, before we go into Unigine Heaven and test out the gaming performance, I also want to mention something else that comes with these 11th Gen and the XPS, and that's Wi-Fi 6 and Bluetooth 5.1, which you don't get on the MacBook Pro. Now, as far as Bluetooth, 5.1 isn't a big deal. You are going to get a little bit better range, a little bit better reliability, but the Wi-Fi 6 part, that matters. So I have good internet at home. I have a Wi-Fi 6 router, and at the toughest basement corner of my house, I would actually get about twice the speed with the previous XPS that also had Wi-Fi 6. So instead of getting about 90, I would get about 170 megabit per second. So keep that in mind if that matters for you. Now, unfortunately, the MacBook with Big Sur is not launching Unigine Heaven, but we're still gonna run it to test out how the new Xe graphics perform. And I do have our previous test with the older version of the XPS at 10th Gen Open and the MacBook Pro, so you can still compare the scores. We're almost done with the test, and I want to point out that it seems like this new XPS is running quieter than the previous one, even though we have more powerful graphics. There we have it, and wow, once again, man, the graphics are killing it. We're looking at 24.4 FPS for integrated graphics, and this is by far the best I've ever seen, even beating out some low-end cards that people put into laptops. Now, just a year and a half, maybe 2 years ago, this was like at 7 or 8. massive improvement. So compared to the previous XPS, that got 13.7, and this MacBook Pro, when it's working, it runs at 13.5. So almost the same about 4 months ago, but with this update, almost twice the graphics performance, which is great for gaming, video editing, things like that. Now I want to put in a plug here. If you guys want to see how this 11th gen compares to the 10th gen, which I have, where's my other laptop? Right here, same exact version that's in the MacBook Pro. If you guys want to see some maybe video editing, photo editing, some gaming tests, make sure you guys click that subscribe button and enable those notifications. And now it's time to test the full performance of the processors, as well as taking a look at the heat and the fan noise. Now I have Cinebench R20 open here, just gonna push all the cores to their limits. Unfortunately, on the Windows side, for some reason, Intel Power Gadget is not working, so I have a couple alternatives, so we'll still be able to make this work. Let's go ahead and get started with our test. I'm gonna hit run on both of these, and I'm gonna keep an eye out on our wattage and our frequencies, and then temperatures as well. Right away, we're at 90 degrees on the Dell and 98 on the MacBook Pro, even hotter. And we reached a peak of almost 40 watts on the MacBook, and we're looking about 36, 38 on the XPS. So it also is going above that 28 watt rating and getting some great performance. The XPS is running at 3.4 gigahertz right now, compared to about 2.9 on the MacBook. So definitely high frequencies. It's starting to cut down just a little bit here. And of course we have this in the high performance mode. The XPS's fans are kicking up, and now we're roughly at about 80 degrees Celsius. So it's starting to cool it down, but that's also because our wattage is at 19. So it looks like, yes, Dell is lowering wattage to keep this running cool and quiet. On the other side though, we're still running at 99 degrees Celsius, super hot. We are getting some power throttling, but not as much. 18 watts compared to 28, 29. So Apple doesn't care. And the fans are now spinning up louder than XPS's, but we're definitely keeping up performance. We're near the end now. The MacBook Pro sounds not like a hairdryer, but getting close to there. It's definitely loud, whereas the Dell is almost silent, but it's only running at 15 watts at 70 degrees Celsius instead of 97. Bam, so the MacBook actually beat the Dell XPS in getting the test done. And wow, so the XPS scored 1485. That's actually slightly slower than last time around, and our MacBook scored 1676. Now this will actually run closer to 1900 if you run it unplugged, because it doesn't heat up as much. Very odd, and we've only found that with this particular MacBook Pro. That's shocking how much Dell is limiting the wattage of the system out of the box. I don't know if that's for battery life or for what. And just to show you guys, as far as Windows performance setting, it is set to best performance when we're plugged in. And so let's dig a little deeper. I went ahead and opened up Dell Powers Management, and going into the thermal management, we have a setting here for ultra performance. So I'm gonna change it to that. Let's run this again. I hope this gets better as far as performance, because this is really bad. I'm gonna unplug the MacBook Pro for our second run, and let's see what kind of difference that makes. And here's the results of the second run. Our MacBook Pro didn't really change that much compared to the last run, even though we've had it over 1900 in the past. Whereas the XPS, it went up to 1753, so now beating out the MacBook Pro and getting a good improvement compared to before. Now it's still interesting that the wattage actually still went all the way down to 15 watts towards the end of the test, just didn't throttle as early on. It did run a little bit louder, still quite a bit quieter than the MacBook Pro. And overall, the Mac, if you want the best performance, actually unplug it. It's really weird, but with the Dell, make sure you go and change that setting. I'm gonna explore this further, see if there's any other limitations on this system for our full review, so make sure you guys are subscribed for that video. Now let's talk about battery life, and this is gonna get a little bit interesting here. The previous Dell XPS with the same display, that got about 5 to 6 hours of battery life, which isn't great, compared to about 8 to 9 hours of battery life on this MacBook Pro. Now, of course, we do have the new 11th gen CPUs, which that could help. We'll talk about that in our full review as well. But if you're gonna go for the XPS and you get the 1080p screen, that actually gets better battery life than the MacBook Pro at 9 to 10 hours of real world use. So if you want this gorgeous 4K display, I would probably expect maybe 5 to 6, or maybe with 11th gen, maybe possibly 7, but we'll have to see in the future. And now let's talk about prices. The retail price of the MacBook Pro is $1,800 and the Dell XPS is actually $1,700. It's $100 less expensive, and that's with this higher than 4K display that's also a touchscreen. Now, of course, with the XPS, there's lots of different configurations. So I'm gonna have a few linked down in the video description that I would recommend. There's a 1080p option. You guys can go and check out those prices. And of course, there's constantly sales. For example, right now for the MacBook Pro, there is a fantastic sale, probably the best price I've seen. And you guys can check those prices out at the time that you're watching this video. Now, the RAM and the SSDs match up here, but of course, with the XPS, those upgrades are cheaper when you're buying it out of the gate, and you can actually upgrade that M.2 SSD yourself. So my suggestion would be buy a lower end configuration for the SSD and use our recommended 2TB SSD. Upgrade that yourself. It's going to be faster than what's in here. It's less expensive, and you'll get 2 terabytes of capacity. I'll make sure to link that down below as well. So what is my overall verdict? Well, I just have to say, wow, I did not expect so many little differences and changes that are making the XPS so incredible. The keyboard is fantastic. I don't want to say it yet, but it might just be better than the MacBook Pro's awesome Magic Keyboard. The trackpad is probably the best Windows trackpad we've used. I keep saying that with the Dell XPS reviews, but they keep making it even better. The screen reflectivity I was not expecting, and when we're looking at it more so, it's not as deep on the blacks, but I think it might actually be less reflective. And this was an issue with many Dell XPSs, so that has been solved. The graphics performance is the best we've ever seen. You can actually do some gaming on this laptop, which we will be testing out. And the CPU performance, for your normal usage, single core performance is through the roof, multi-core performance is awesome. And then if we can get the wattage not drop so fast for people doing photo and video editing with this great graphics, man, it's gonna do an awesome job. So this thing is impressive at this price point with a 4K touchscreen and the storage and RAM. This is gonna make an incredible machine for those of you guys who don't mind having Windows instead of Mac OS. The MacBook Pro has Mac OS, the trackpad is better, the speakers are better, the display, it's sharp, and it doesn't drain as much battery, so it's still a great option for the price. It's a really tough choice. I think what I said before, and I agree even more now, if you're somebody that doesn't mind Windows, you're gonna have an excellent experience with this laptop. You're getting a ton of bang for the buck. Let me know your guys' thoughts down in the comment section below. Which one would you buy and why? Make sure to click that circle above to subscribe for our full review and check out one of these other great videos right over there. This has been Max, and I'll see you in the next video.